Welcome to Midnight in Brussels. I'm your stand-in host today, Bill Sharp. The normal host, Jay Fidel, got sick. He's in the doctor's office right now. But we're going to be joined here by our correspondent in Brussels, Gauri Kandakar. And we want to talk about what's going on in Europe. And most prominently, to get the things going here, we want to talk about the attacks in Cologne. So Gauri, tell us about those attacks in Cologne.
Hi, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Thank you.
Well, there's been quite a bit of buzz over events that happened over New Year's Eve in Cologne. So those of the viewers who don't know where Cologne is, it's a city in Germany. It's to the north west, and it's a very liberal town. It used to be a town of and it still is actually of artists, and it also has a large gay community, and it's a very open town, young town, lots of students as well. And Cologne really knows how to celebrate in a way. So
Why is that? Why does it know how to celebrate?
We'll come to that because, out of personal experience as well, I go to Cologne quite often. One of my best friends lives in Cologne. And I've been there, and they have these really nice carnival celebrations where the entire city comes out to party. So it's a very laid back city, if you like. And people really know how to live it up in a way, It's really not representative of a cold Germany that one would think of, but it's very lively. And Cologne especially because it's so young, it's such a young city, it has a lot of youth there and young workers. So, it's a very young, vibrant city. And over New Year's Eve this year, something quite terrible happened, which affected me personally in a way, because, I have a lot of affection for this city. So over the New Year's Eve, when people were out partying, there was a group of around 1,000 people, men, and there were hundreds of attacks, sexual attacks, assaults on women, and a few rapes, which really shocked Germany and all of Europe in a way. And the most shocking bit of it was that these attacks were perpetrated by migrants. There were migrants and refugees who were
These are migrants from Syria?
Yes, actually refugees, people who have applied for asylum in Germany, and they were perpetrating the attacks. So it was according to officials, it was a coordinated attack. So around 1,000 people came, and they attacked young women. They targeted these women, and they were basically those few arrested were found to be migrants and refugees and asylum seekers, basically.
Wow.
And then there were also, the same night, there were also clashes with the police. These attackers were also bursting crackers at the police. And they were basically saying to the police that Merkel invited us, she asked us to come over. And some of them tore their cards, the residence cards that they were given, saying, they were taunting the police, saying, well, we'll get another one tomorrow. So These are the events. Yes, it's been quite shocking.
Well, these migrants that carried out these acts, how long had they been in Germany? Just ones that recently arrived? Or had they been there some time?
Some of them have been the ones that have been recently arriving. This year, Germany has accepted over 1 million refugees. And some of these have been those that have come in recently, They still don't have so much data over it, or a lot of people have not been arrested. And the police chief of Cologne was fired 2 days ago.
Wow.
So he will be replaced. It was quite a big, shocking event in Germany and in Europe, like I say, So not much is yet known because everybody was not arrested that night.
Well,
And because the
when
police,
you're talking about this, and I'm trying to better understand the situation and understand the motivation of these asylum seekers and refugees for carrying out these attacks, which were basically directed against women
yes,
and were of a sexual nature.
yes,
Um, I'm wondering if this is, and the reason I ask is how long have they been in Germany? Sometimes refugees are welcomed into a country and
yes,
then nothing happens. They just sort of sit there and sit there and sit there, and they might be collecting some sort of government assistance, but basically they've got a lot of time on their hands. And they feel that, on one hand, while a country has opened its doors to them, they're not really very accepting of them, and so then they revolt.
yes.
Is that make sense? Could that be a possible motivation for these folks?
Well, it's the whole picture is quite different because, of course, you have these asylum centers that you
Uh-huh.
would like, if you
Mm-hmm.
say, and it's known that many people are placed in these asylum centers for a lot of time.
Mm.
Um, and then they get frustrated. But I mean, if we see what's happening in the bigger picture, so those Syrians that have fled to Europe have obviously most of them have passed through refugee camps in Jordan or in the bordering countries, right?
Right, right,
And the conditions there were far worse. That's why they've come to Europe.
right.
In Europe, there are different conditions, so there's no unified kind of welcome conditions across Europe, but each country has its own set of different rules and regulations. Now, European countries have been so overwhelmed, they basically put the migrants in different kind of housing facilities. Sometimes in Germany, the in Berlin, actually, an old SS building was converted into this asylum housing
An
facility.
old SS building. I
But
guess you
I
have to
think,
use standing buildings for whatever use they can be used for.
well, basically, they've been processed quite fast. So I wouldn't think it's out of frustration because most of them have arrived fairly recently. Um,
This is kind of interesting because um, typically it seems to me when you hear about these kinds of um, events
yes,
in Germany, it usually involves the German skinheads, which
yes,
seem to be, from what I understand, I'm not a European expert, but from what I understand, most of the skinheads are found in the old eastern sector of Germany.
yes,
And they definitely feel like they've been left behind as after Germany reunited, and some cities like Leipzig have been built up and industries have poured money in there. But they tend to be they would tend to be the folks that would strike out at refugees. But now we have a situation where refugees and asylum seekers are striking out at Germans.
yeah.
It's a totally different situation, isn't it?
It is quite odd, and actually, if you note, so these kind of attacks were also reported in other countries like Austria, Sweden. So a host of other countries had reported same kind of attacks on the same night. So now the warning has been given across Europe that women should avoid going out alone at night, which is so shocking here
That's a
because
breach of freedom when you can't walk on the street,
no, and
regardless of
this,
what time of day or night it is. That's a breach of freedom.
of course, and this is not the Middle East, and this is not Africa or another. I mean, Europe has been known; it's been reputed as a very safe continent, and women have equal liberties and
Right.
rights, and it's very safe to go out. I would say prior to the recent terror attacks that have been happening and these kind of attacks, it
Right.
has been quite safe, but now it just seems to have changed overnight.
Well, let's shift our focus here a little bit and maybe try to do some comparison. Okay, excuse me. We had these attacks in Cologne. Obviously a city that a lot of people know for the Cologne Cathedral.
Yes.
Every tourist that's ever thought about going to Europe, especially Germany, has probably heard about the Cologne Cathedral.
Yes.
But okay, in France, there have been a lot of issues dealing with refugees and refugee incited terror carried out against the French
Yes.
population. And I don't know if there's been refugees. Well, no, let me back up there. These have been refugees that have carried out a different kind of attack, just not sexual attack, pretty blatant attack. I mean, shooting people, bombing places. And, you know, for what I understand of France, actually, in many ways, I admire France, and I think it has a lot of philosophies and way of thinking is very similar to American thought. Of course, there's differences. There's always differences. They always talk about equality, fraternity, liberté, and all that. But it seems that a lot of those, like, people from northern Africa and other parts of the Middle East that end up in France, even if some of them are born and raised in France, they're never integrated with French society. And they're all sequestered in these, I'll call them ghettos. I hope that's not too harsh of a term. These ghettos, somewhat on the outskirts of Paris. Banlieue or some. I never studied French, but I think it's called banlieue or banlieue or something like that.
Beaulieu.
Oh yeah,
Beaulieu.
there you go. Thank you. You studied French.
Yes.
Of course, you're living in Brussels too. And these have been cauldrons of protest. When Sarkozy was the president of France, or was he Ministry of the Interior at that time, there was this huge
Yes.
demonstration.
Yes.
And this problem seems to never have been solved. And I think that Europe as a whole has a problem. While it might open its doors to all these refugees or people from the Arab world and Northern Africa, it has a lot of trouble integrating people into society.
Yeah, I have been debating about this with a lot of my friends. Basically, I come from India. I've grown up there, and there you can really see what ghetto is. When you see the slums, the word ghetto originated in the Second World War with Poland.
Right,
That
right,
was
right,
their
right, right.
ghetto, and that kind of facilities you could see in poorer countries, in India or elsewhere. I wouldn't really call the banlieues as ghettos.
Okay.
Or I mean, I'm just sharing a few of my views. Yeah.
Sure, that's what the show's all about, right?
Yeah. So, excuse me.
Sure.
So recently, when there was the terror threat in Brussels, there's a neighborhood called Molenbeek, which has now been dubbed the terror capital of Europe. And there were some people, journalists even, think tankers, researchers calling it as a ghetto. And I said it's not a ghetto because I've been there. You have high-rise buildings, the living facilities are great, transport is excellent. I would not call that a ghetto. The problem with integration here, I would say, is two ways. So, education facilities in Europe are some of the cheapest, to be very honest. Even in India, so the master, when I did 10 years ago in France, cost in the best university, costed less than it would have in India. And
That
this
is a university in Europe, you mean?
in France, yes.
In France.
The top university in France costed less than it would have, I would have paid in India. Schooling is largely free, public schools, there are good opportunities. But it's also up to the migrant families, the mothers in particular, to push their children, to motivate them to get educated, to get jobs, because there are honestly, there are opportunities available for those who work hard, for those who are motivated, and this doesn't seem to happen amongst the migrants. There are language classes. If language is a barrier, I think there have been many facilities offered for offering languages, and most of the North Africans do speak French. If we speak about France, so that I would not count as a barrier either. What is sometimes a drawback for Europe in a way, which should be its biggest advantage, is also the nature of its social economy, its social welfare states in Europe mainly.
Right.
And most of these migrant families, because they don't get jobs, they tend to take handouts from the state.
And remain on handouts.
Yeah, and that has kind of been one of the causes, that they don't make the effort to integrate well into the community, get jobs. But I think it's largely also due to the families who don't motivate, the moms who don't motivate their children to get the best education, to get the best jobs. Because from where I come from, and also in the States, yes, Dr. Martin Luther King also has said the same thing, that education is the passport
Right.
to success, yes?
Okay, we're going to have to take a break here. Okay,
Sure.
so we'll take a 1-minute break. You're watching Midnight in Brussels. I'm the stand-in host for Jay Fidel today. We're talking to Gauri Kandekar, who's coming to us via Skype from Brussels, and we'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Carlos Juarez, host of Global Connections, and I want to invite you to come join us. We cover a range of global issues. We bring a lot of expert opinion, a lot of issues, whether they're contemporary events happening in the world or maybe looking at things from a more historical perspective. Global issues, very important for us to understand in this globally interconnected world. Join us here on Global Connections.
Aloha, my name is Kirsten Baumgart Turner, and I'm the host of Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. We air live on the internet and also on Oceanic Channel 16. I'd invite you to come for a fresh new show every Tuesday from 12 to 1 o'clock. I try to bring on guests that give us a different viewpoint on aspects of sustainability in Hawaii, as well as trying to unpack some of the difficult concepts of measuring and achieving sustainability, particularly with regard to sustainable economic growth and prosperity in Hawaii. Please join us every Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. Mahalo, aloha.
Welcome back to Midnight in Brussels. I'm your stand-in host today, Bill Sharp. Jay Fidel will be back with you next week. I'm talking to Gauri Kandekar, who's coming to us from Brussels in Belgium, coming to us via Skype. We've been talking about a couple of issues here, all revolving around the way in which Europe is coping or seeking to cope with the inflow of refugees. We touched on a number of issues. One being just how well integrated into European societies are these refugees once they land in Europe, from wherever they come. It really does seem, I wonder about France. Of course, I sympathize with the French about the incident that happened just a few weeks ago, the number of people that were killed, and it was a very coordinated, very sophisticated attack. And of course, the French government paid full honors to those that were, that died in that attack, big, ceremonies and that sort of thing. And then they turned the French military loose on Syria. They sent an aircraft carrier to, I guess it was off the coast of Syria, carried out a lot of bombing raids.
Yes.
And which I understand why they did that. But the heart of the problem is essentially back in France. And so how are they going to solve this? What steps can they take to further integrate frankly, the Islamic community in the French society? And as I know it, France has the largest Islamic community of any community in Europe. And it just doesn't seem that they're doing very well with this. I don't know what the solution is. You were saying that, yeah, there are opportunities for education. There's opportunity to learn French if you don't speak French. But a lot of folks are just sort of happy to sit back and take whatever social benefits there are. Probably there's a lot of French like that too. People, let's put it very clearly, white French people born and raised in France are probably happy to also take advantage of that system.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't know. What is the solution to this? I mean, should Europe close its doors?
No, I honestly think that closing one's doors is never the solution.
Mm-hmm.
There is what people don't kind of are ready to accept is there is a problem with Islam. I'm not saying that there's a problem with the religion, but how people are dealing with it at the moment.
How people are dealing with Islam.
Yes, how they're dealing with how it's being perceived at the moment, how Muslims themselves, be it on any spectrum, any part of the spectrum, so from the moderates to really the extremists, are finding themselves facing their religion, how it's turning out, the perception of Islam, basically. That is what I'm trying to put forward. And that is the issue here. So one of the biggest challenges of European countries is trying to learn how to be secular. Most of the people have adopted the notion of laicity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the separation of the normally religion and state, and this was really the church and the state. But they don't have much experience of secularism like countries like India would have, because we've had multiplicity of religions over centuries.
Right.
And we've learned to kind of adapt to different religions. This has not been the case in Europe largely. And especially if you see the history of the Crusades and all of that, then you get a bit of a taste of what is happening. If somebody is, because the number of Muslims is so little here, and the European culture is so strong, more of a Christian culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people tend to stand out. Whoever's not part of the ordinary stands out. So you could see the burqa standing out. If you contrast that with a country like India, you could wear anything on the street, a burqa or whatever, people don't notice it. You see what I mean? Because the populations are so large. Anyways, the percentage are large. But here people tend to stand out. The other issue is that unlike the US, which really has a policy of sifting those who come into the US, they really have a kind of a system where they verify who comes. They want to take the best of the brains from across the globe. So they pick and choose, yes?
That's true.
Europe mainly receives refugees, and they're not so liberal on free movement of the most educated, vibrant minds. There are a lot of people who come to Europe to study, but then, getting work visas for them is quite hard, if you see. In comparison, those people who run the kebab shops here, for instance, them and their relatives conversely find it easier to get visas to stay on and subsequently citizenships. So the refugees that have come to Europe, or the people that come to Europe, are mainly those from North African countries or Africa, but also from the most rural parts. So if you take those communities which are quite religious in a way, but also sometimes backward, and you put them in the most liberal, most advanced zones of the world, there is going to be a clash.
That's a very interesting analysis. You made me. I used to watch the Deutsche Welle a pretty lot, but I haven't done that for a few years. But I remember one story they had, which was about immigration to Germany. Now, I think that everybody would agree that Germany is a great manufacturing power.
Yes.
And the German manufacturing is very high tech, is very sophisticated. But you know what? I don't think you can make the argument that Germany is a high tech power. And periodically, the German government gets concerned about that. Say, well, high tech industries should be more present in Germany than is the case. And to do that, they need to bring in talent from other places.
Right.
So India has a lot of talent in high-tech industries, right?
Yes.
People like the India Institute of Technology turn out
Yes.
very well-qualified people.
Yes.
And for them to go to Germany and work for, say, like 3 years or 4 years, unless the situation has changed, it's no big problem. But when that 3 to 4 years is up, and if they want to stay in Germany and become a German citizen, that's extremely hard transition to carry out, and they end up
That's
leaving.
exactly right. Very correct.
They would prefer, in terms of their long-term life planning, they would prefer to go to the United States, or I think we could probably say Canada or Australia or someplace like that. So Germany is losing out. And I guess, I mean, you're sitting there in Europe, you know Europe better than I do. I would guess that situation exists in other parts of Europe as well.
Oh, surely. Even currently in Germany and in other parts of Europe, Europe is facing a kind of a mushroom kind of demographic future in a way, where there's a shrinking population crisis. There are going to be a lot of older people, basically the baby boomers, who are going to have to be supported by a very small percentage of population comparatively.
Right.
And Europe needs this kind of migration, but it would be preferred to have a better quality of migration in the sense of more the brain drain a la US.
Right.
High qualified workers,
Right.
the ones who can contribute to economy and not drain it.
Right.
That is what Europe needs. That is what it's exactly not doing in a way. It's so much easier to get a green card in the US, for instance, than it is here. And most Asians prefer the US because it's more merit based. So if you manage to work hard and if you manage to stay on, you're completely eligible to get your green card and stay on.
Interesting.
It's not the case.
With that note, I've just been informed that we need to take another break. So we'll take
Sure.
a 1-minute break. You're watching Midnight in Brussels. I'm your stand-in host today, Bill Sharp, standing in for Jay Fidel. Jay will be back next week. We're talking with Gauri Kandakar, who's coming to us from Brussels, Belgium, via Skype. And we'll be back in just 1 minute.
Aloha, my name is Justina Spiritu, and I'm the co-host of Hawaii Farmers Series. This is my co-host, Matthew Johnson, and you can catch us every Thursday at 4 p.m. at thinktechhawaii.com. What do we talk about, Matt?
So on Hawaii Farmers Series, we're going to be bringing on the farmers and also supporter of farmers, including restaurants, caterers, as well as government supporters and nonprofits to hear their background stories and understanding our local ag community just a little bit better.
Yeah, essentially, there's a lot more that goes into farming and the local food community beyond just producing the food. And we want to feature and get the background story on all these folks and see how we all work together as a community. So join us every Thursday. Aloha.
Aloha! How you doing? It's me, Angus McTech, asking you to come join us on Think Tech Hawaii Hibachi Talk. Join me and my two hosts, Gordo the Tech Czar and Ender the Security Guy, every Friday from 12:45 till 13:45. See you on Fridays, and remember, let your wing gang free wherever you be.
Welcome back to Midnight in Brussels. I'm your standing host, Bill Sharp, standing in for Jay Fidel. Jay will be back with you next week. We're having a real interesting conversation with Gauri Kandakar, who's coming to us via Skype from Brussels, Belgium, what I call the capital city of Europe, given that that is where NATO is headquartered, that's where the European Commission is headquartered, and so much that affects Europe's future happens right there in Brussels. We've been talking about refugees, asylum seekers in Europe, and how well Europe is dealing with the problem. And I think we would agree that while on one hand, it's really very commendable that Europe throws its arms open to refugees, especially those coming out of Syria. It's not doing a very good job in integrating them. Now, of course, some of these folks from Syria are just very recent arrivees, and so we do need to give the Europeans some time to come to bear with that. But then again, we've had refugees, asylum seekers, immigrants from other parts of North Africa, the Middle East, who've been in Europe a long time, some born and raised in Europe in actuality, and just have always been kind of on the fringes of society. So we're dealing with a very complex issue here, but we're trying to brainstorm some ideas of how Europe might better deal with this situation and what the causes are. Now, you know, it seems to me, Gauri, that some of the causes might be, well, let me explain a little. I lived in Japan for a long period of time.
Okay.
And this was at a time in the 80s when Japan was really doing very, very well, better than it's doing these days. And everybody wanted to be like Japan. But of course, Japan is a country that has a lot of, I'll call them hang-ups when it comes to immigration and accepting refugees. After the Vietnam War, countries around the world were accepting large numbers of refugees coming out of Vietnam. Japan accepted a handful at best. And so there's that problem on Japan's side. On the other side of the coin, it seemed to me that European powers who once had these large colonial empires that controlled large sections of the world, and you would think that they would have a lot of built-up skills in dealing with people of diverse cultures. But I saw the Europeans were very, very challenged in dealing with Japan. I think Americans were better at it than the Europeans were.
Yes.
And I'm not sure exactly why. I mean, there are plenty of universities in Europe that specialize in Asian affairs and do a very good job. There's like the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. Of course, Oxford and Cambridge have highly developed Asian studies programs, and there are other universities in continental Europe.
Yes.
But still, the Europeans seem to be very challenged in dealing with Asia.
Yes.
And I don't know, it's probably true in other parts of the world, but I can't speak to those as clearly or as assertively. Maybe it's part of the sort of what I call the residual arrogance of colonialism. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, it's so funny because, you know, you put your finger on it correctly. They've had such a European powers of the time. And excluding Germany, of course. Germany didn't have any colonies, I think, except one in Africa.
Yeah, just a
But
few
most-
at the best.
Yes. But most European powers at the time had colonies in Asia. And even before European powers, so Alexander the Great himself, so he traveled all the way to India, yes? Where he kind of was injured. And eventually, due to those injuries, he passed away. But anyway, so Europe has a history of its connections with Asia. Somehow, that over the past 50 years or so, it's been forgotten, you know. I think Europe was so involved in reconstructing itself that it gave birth to a completely new Europe without any of its historical linkages. You mentioned there are a few good important schools, but they're not enough. You know, so many Asians know more about Europe than most Europeans know about Asians. And this is in my past job, I worked as head of Asia program in a European think tank, a Spanish think tank. And what I'd been writing about and speaking was, you know, the paucity of information that there is on Asia, that Europe does not seem to look at Asia so much as compared with other regions. You know, it's ignoring Asia in a way. And that continues to be true. And I really don't understand why exactly. And conversely, Germany is the one that's doing best with Asia in terms of trade, in terms of diplomacy, a little bit the UK,
That's
but
a
other
very
countries,
interesting comment. Yeah.
yeah, but and most of the other countries tend to stereotype Asia a lot. And here I'm speaking really from personal experience as well.
Could Germany's success with Asia be that Germany, for example, with China, Germany has created a strategic relationship, and they see China and other parts of Asia, I'm sure, as huge export markets.
Yes.
And so they really focused a lot of attention on Asia because of, frankly, economics. Is that the reason why Germany is doing so well with Asia?
Exactly. So even during the European debt crisis that was taking place over the years, Germany was the one that performed the best. Uh, Germany has been the richest nation of recent, as everybody has been hearing, has also helped bail out Greece, you know. And Germany is the country in the EU which trades the most with Asia.
Right.
Most
Right.
European countries trade amongst themselves.
Right.
But Germany has been so shrewd, so astute that it's really tapped into growth prospects in Asia, because Asia is the fastest growing region, the
Right.
most
Right.
prosperous region in the world, apart from Europe, of course, but the most vibrant in terms of growth and prospects. And Germany has been keen to look to that. Uh, and so that's why Germany has been leading kind of the European Union out of the crisis as well, you know? So I would completely agree with you.
Interesting. Well, you know, we sort of beat up on the Europeans a bit there and said that, well, the Europeans, you know, having trouble understanding Asia and other parts of the world. And whereas people in other
True.
parts of the world, Asia, for example, tend to understand Europe a lot better than Europeans understand Asia or wherever. And I think that's probably true of the United States in general too. Is you know, people around the world, I wouldn't limit that comment to Asia. They tend to understand America better than Americans understand other countries. If there's any defense to that, it could be that people, rightly or wrongly, from around the world tend to focus their attention on America. America has a whole assortment of other countries in which to cast its attention upon.
Yes.
So its effect is somewhat diluted.
Yes. Well, you know, of course, America is a superpower. It's still the superpower, and it would
Of
just
course,
be
the
normal for
Chinese would
every.
say we're a power in decline. They like to say that, yeah.
It's still a
The Chinese word
superpower, you know?
"shuai." In other words, we're falling behind. They'd love to say that.
Yeah, I know all the presidential candidates surely would. But it's still, the truth is that it's still a superpower in a multipolar world. So it's just normal that every country or would know America quite well. But what the US does really brilliantly is that even though the large swathes of the population might not know other parts of the world so well, the diplomacy is quite advanced. Um, this is also thanks to the migrant populations that they've welcomed, they've integrated, and if you see the trajectory, migrants have done quite well in the US.
Yeah, that's true. They've done extremely well.
Exactly.
Migrants add a lot of energy into America. They bring energy, they bring talent. In some cases, they bring a lot of money. I don't think that America would be as successful as I think it has been if it hadn't been for the steady inflow of migrants. This, as you
True.
say, bringing new energy all the time.
True, I agree with you. And they also integrate them into their diplomatic tools,
Right.
into the administrations, into embassies, uh, uh, and and the people abroad get to interact with people of their own cultures in a way, but also the Americans there. So who were formerly, or their parents were formerly migrants.
We have 2 minutes
No,
here, so we'll have to not
sure.
get too carried away.
Yes, but I was just saying that there's a cultural understanding that is quite deep.
That's very interesting. Let me throw this question at you. It's unfair with less than 2 minutes to throw this at you, so I'm going to ask for a very brief answer.
Yes.
Are Europe and America beginning to go their separate ways?
Even if they would, I don't think the Europeans would really latch off still.
That's true. Oh, you said the Europeans will hold on.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think they've been weaned off yet.
That's a very, very interesting comment. And actually, I understand what you say from a defense point of view. So much European defense is actually built on U.S. defense systems. Like the French might have sent their carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, to off the coast of Syria, but they depend on the U.S. for targeting information.
Of course, of course. The Europeans tend to mainly follow US foreign policy, what the US is doing, and they still look up to the US so much. There's not too much independence when it comes to external affairs here. I mean, Washington still governs Brussels in a way.
Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, it's been great talking to you. Do you come to Hawaii occasionally?
Unfortunately, I've not been there since 2012, but I really hope 2016, since it's a new year, I would get to travel to Hawaii again this year. So let's hope.
That's your New Year's resolution. Come to Hawaii.
Exactly.
Go to Hawaii. Oh, interesting. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope I did an acceptable job in standing in for Jay Fidel.
You were fantastic, Bill. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
And
I
please
enjoyed
pass
talking
my
to you
best
as
wishes
well.
to Jay.
Okay, well, perhaps we'll talk again.
Yes, a bientôt. See you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for watching. And as I promised throughout the show, your regular host, Jay Fidel, will be back next week.